Okay. I've listened to a couple of the podcasts, and it seems that the protocol is to have an awful joke for you, also known as the dad joke. So it's in the form of a riddle, and it is: what is the leading cause of dry skin?
I
I
can't.
said,
It still gets me.
go for it, Alan.
Answer is towels.
Oh, I'm so happy with dad jokes, the terrible jokes that everyone tells, and it's become my forte now. Um, so, so everyone, welcome to another episode of As Dad as It Gets, the podcast where you can get all of the jokes you want
So many.
with no subscription fee. I am your host Larry, and with me today is Tom and
Hello.
a very special guest. He is a man of many talents. He is founder, director of Dadding Film Festival, or D3F. Is that the short term for it?
It's a Daddying Film Festival and Forum, and
Oh,
that's
okay. Sorry.
three F's. Film
That's for
Triple
Festival
the.
F.
Yeah.
Forum.
Got it. Okay.
My notes are a terrible mess. Uh, but Allan Shedling, and I'm super excited about this episode actually because why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, Allan?
Okay. Most important is I'm a dad and granddad. That's my most important degree. Is a DAD. So I'm trained as an educator. I began my career in New York City in the public schools working with severely emotionally disturbed and autistic kids. I took great pride in identifying myself at the time as an emotionally disturbed teacher. Um, and I thought it was very interesting at the time that the word special in our culture has a positive valence and association until you put the word education afterwards, in which case it's no longer positive in most people's mind. And I actually believed it was always positive.
Right.
Um, and so I wanted to see what would happen if you took the mindset of a special educator, where you have to look really hard for the assets that the kids have so that you can build on it, and wondered if you use that same mindset with kids who were designated normal or even gifted. And I ended up as the principal of a school for gifted children. Also happened to be in New York City. And I found that that absolutely was true, that using that mindset was very, very helpful with all children. Um, when you begin as a special educator, you spend a lot of time working with people in other fields that focus on kids, like neurologists, psychologists, social workers, etc. And when you work in regular education, that doesn't happen unless there's a problem. And I miss that. I miss that cross fertilization. Um, and I also missed the fact that, having worked in both public schools and private schools or independent schools, that when you were in each, you thought of each other as the enemy camp. You didn't really recognize each other as colleagues. And really, one of the main things that bothered me was the lack of appreciation, and you as dads of younger kids will get this, the lack of appreciation of the earliest school years.
Yeah.
So I left my principal's job and started something which became the National Elementary School Center. And its purpose was to address the cross fertilization, the collegiality of private and public school people, but most important, the importance of the earliest school years. And so when we did our two national conferences a year, we introduced our guest speakers by where they graduated from elementary school. We,
I
we,
I think
yeah,
you
we didn't mention where they went to college. That and
you might be the most professional dad that has graced us with your presence. So it definitely sounds like you've got a lot of experience and information to share with the world, and you do a lot of this through the blog that you run, and some of um, the blog it's dad I can't even talk
Advocacy?
dadvocacy
but
consulting group.
Yes,
yeah,
nailed
but
it.
it's just called the Daddying blog.
That's a
Easier,
lot easier.
yeah.
Yeah. Um, but the blog definitely covers a lot of the harder hitting subjects of parenthood. There was one that um, let's see, where was it? It was the greatest weapon that a parent can have, and it was talking about Narcan,
Yeah.
the overdosing medicine. And I think as parents, that's not something we really want to think about. And you this blog goes out and it talks about those hard hitting subjects there. Do you ever have trouble writing those blogs, knowing that parents are going through this?
Well, I'm happy you cited that particular blog because that blog was written by Scott Beller. And
Okay.
Scott Beller is the editor of the blog. So I tend to write 2 to 3 a month. He tends to write maybe one a month. And then we invite guest bloggers. So I hereby invite you and any of your listeners who want to send us a proposal for a blog. And by going on our website, it'll be obvious and easy how you do it. But yes, it's being having grandchildren. So I'm a very different part of the spectrum than you guys. Um, so my youngest grandchild is 17, and my oldest grandchild is 26 and is about to graduate from graduate school. So, I'm no smarter than anybody else who's gone through being a dad and being a parent. I just have a little more experience and try to make use of it. So, one of the things I have observed is every generation thinks it's harder. Parenting is harder than it was for the prior generation. I thought that too when I,
I think that as well.
but I happen to believe it's true. I do think each generation it has gotten harder, and it's much harder now. I did not need to worry when my kids, who are all members of ARP, um, I didn't have to worry about those kind of drugs. Yes, alcohol,
Right.
of course, but not those kind of drugs. And it's just a scarier world. We didn't, and as a school principal, I didn't need to worry about lockdowns. Um, so I
Yeah.
do think that the ante, and you can spell it either ANTE or ANTI, has been raised on growing up and thus being a parent. Absolutely. Um,
And also, I think one of the greatest quotes that I have ever heard is, let me see if I can find it so I don't misquote it. Um, where are it was in regards to why D3F exists. Um, and gosh, my handwriting is terrible. Um, but
I'm
it's
not
because of
surprised.
our relationship with our fathers, in its presence or absence is one of the most important relationships of our lives. And I'll be honest with you, that one hit me the hardest because I grew up mostly without my father due to drugs. Um, and so it affects me as a parent today because a lot of the parenting that I do because I don't want to be like my dad. Um, and so where did you come up with that quote there?
So it goes back to after leaving the National Elementary School Center, somebody asked me, "What do you want to do next? What do you want to be when you grow up?" And the easiest answer to that is I have no intention of ever growing up. So what do you want to do next? And I said I didn't know. And they said, well, we had a conversation with your three daughters, who at that point were in their early 20s, and the way they speak about you as a father, you need to write a book about fathering. That could be the most flattering thing I ever heard. And I did say to that person, that lady, um, lucky you didn't talk to them when they were teenagers. You might have gotten a really different take on what they thought of their dad.
I did want to say, was talking to a friend earlier today. Um, she was having some rough emotional time and like reached out to me. I've known her for years. But she like just vented to me and I was like, hey, like, I know you've listened to some of the episodes of our podcast. I don't know if this will make you feel better, but this is what we're recording tonight. And she told like her relationship with her father was horrible. She's in her 30s and still traumatized by it, but she said I was like a second dad. And I was like, oh,
Yeah, yeah.
oh God, no, like that. I'm not gonna cry.
That's perfectly fine to cry. Um,
Yeah, no, I absolutely did.
so, but getting back, Larry, to trying to answer your question regarding that quote. So when I started working with dads, which
Hmm.
started in 1997, when I started working with dads, I've done a lot of different things, including regular workshops and that kind of stuff in all sorts of settings, and we can get to that later if you'd like. But
Yeah.
um, I've also now interviewed one on one 205 fathers, ranging in age from 16 to 104,
Oh
from
wow.
20 different countries, um, every socioeconomic, every ethnic, every whatever variety of groups. And out of those 205 interviews, I guess I should ask you, how many of the guys do you think during, and the interview, when I started doing them, lasted anywhere from, a short one would be an hour and a half,
Hmm.
and um, some of them went to 3 and 4 hours. And we can talk about the difference because I had a protocol of questions I asked. So, depended on the depth of your answer and what you wanted to share of how long the interview took. So the question for you is, what percentage of the guys do you think cried or their eyes welled up and they sort of fought their tears in those interviews?
if we're including both of those in the same, I would say 95%.
Yeah, I was gonna say 90% higher, the higher end.
Yeah. So you guys are clearly smart and have thought a lot about this. Most people don't guess that high, but it's about 92%. So you're both
Yeah.
sort of right. And it tends often, I find when I talk about this, that women tend to be a little bit surprised by that. Women are particularly seem to be surprised if I do the interview at home, which has happened in about Oh, a quarter of those interviews. I did them wherever the dad tells me he'll have an hour and a half, which is now about how long they take because I've shortened the protocol. Um, Wherever they say they're willing to do it. So it's been in a fishing boat, it's been in a limousine going to Wall Street, it's been, a pickup truck, it's been all over. And so I describe what I call the bookends of daddy yearning and a soulful sadness, which in a way you just described, Larry, and you just described, Tom, and the lady who called you. It's a soulful sadness, and so dads are extraordinarily important in their presence, but also in their absence.
Right.
Um, and when you say, Larry, that you are determined not to be the kind of dad that you had, one of the workshops I did was at the World Bank. I live in the DC area. And so the World Bank is located here. And I did a series, it's called Becoming the Dad You Want to Be, with the and the U is capitalized. YOU is capitalized. Not the dad your mother-in-law wants you to be. It's not the dad, somebody else wants you to be. The dad you want to be. And so it was a brown bag lunch thing, 6 sessions. And the first session, and all volunteer. Um, so 8 guys come in, which is a good size for a group like this. And the guy next to me, and I asked this question: why did you come? Why are you here? You didn't need to spend your lunchtime in a discussion like this. So the guy on my immediate left is from Italy. And he says, and I won't attempt his accent, which was delightful. He said, I had the worst father ever, and I'm terrified I'm going to turn into him. And
Yeah.
we go around, and then we get to the guy on my immediate right who has even a nicer accent. It's a French accent, and he says, I'm here because I had the best dad ever, and I don't think I'll ever measure up.
See, so I think that's part of why Larry and I connect so well. There is no better person in the world than my dad. He's who I aim and strive to be. And I know Larry didn't have a great dad, and he
Yeah.
wants to be the exact opposite. So, like, we're both trying to be that same incredible person. But yeah, no, anything I can do to be more like my dad is what I want to do.
Well, my answer to all of them was I'm not a scientist. I'm certainly not a geneticist. But as far as I know, there's no daddying gene, and you are not condemned one way or another. You get to decide who is the dad you want to be. You get to decide that. And when I ask that question, who is the dad you want to be, it's basically immobilizing. It's just way too, big a question. And so what
Yeah.
I've learned, yeah, right.
It's like, oh, how do I narrow this down to like something that isn't going to take me 5 hours to explain?
Right. So I've changed it in a way that still is a little bit intimidating, but manageable with a little effort, which is, how do you want your child to describe you as a father 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 15 years from now? And that is also rough. That's a hard question, but
Yeah.
you can get a handle on it. You can get a handle on that. And so that's for me what all of this work is about. When I'm finished with each of those individual dating interviews, I often say, I'll bet you that you just spent more intense, focused time thinking about being a dad than you've cumulatively spent up until this moment. And for the most part, that's true. You guys are probably both a little bit in what I call the automatic pilot phase of dadding, where you don't really have much reflective time, maybe a time like this, you do. And maybe that's
Yeah.
one of the great things for both of you about the podcast, is that you do get to think and spend focused time on the dad you want to be. So that's why that quote, in their presence and their absence, is so important.
Yeah, and I'd never even thought of it until I read that quote about how much my dad actually influenced me as a father. Um, and during all of your interviews, did you ever learn anything from anybody you were interviewing, or something you hadn't thought of as far as parenting or grandparenting?
That's a good and a fair question. Um, I learned some wonderful stories, and different ways of explaining feelings and saying things. It definitely helped me understand better my own trajectory,
Hmm.
and the dad that I am, and the granddad I am. You guys are far from that, but
Hopefully.
I
Yeah,
got to
I hope.
yeah, but I have to tell you that granddaddying is a hell of a lot easier.
Well, yeah, you get to be the fun one where you're just like, oh yeah, and then hand them back, and
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it is. So the answer, did I learn anything? I guess I didn't learn new stuff. I learned different ways of thinking about some of the things I've done, and it was um, very fascinating to me. I mean, one of the things that I have now discovered is I always end the interview by thanking the person for giving me an hour to 2 or 3 hours of their time. And without fail, the response is no, thank you. Because we don't get a hell of a lot of time to think about this stuff, to have somebody listen, and who asks questions and is interested in what your answer is. Um, it's like it, it it's like pulling guys pulling their finger out of an emotional dike, and once they do that, it starts flowing. I think you guys probably have that happen anyway, but a lot
Yeah.
of the men that I've spoken to are surprised with how much they want to talk about this and how much they want to talk about their feelings. It's really quite astounding to me.
Yeah, it definitely is. And I think with the younger generations, as new fathers are coming out, um, compared to their parents, I think studies show that they're more emotional than their dad was, and their dad was more emotional than their granddad. Um, so the emotions are coming easier as we move along.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, and the one of the things that I wrote that I feel really good about, which is not everything I write I don't feel good about, but this one I did, which was identifying, and this was back in 2008, and it was something published or distributed by the New York Times news service, and it was called The Daddying Movement. And what it did was to identify what I call an inadvertent revolution, which speaks to what you said, Larry, which is, the times have definitely changed dramatically.
mhm.
And this, I no longer would call it a revolution. I would more, I think, appropriately call it an evolution than a revolution. Um, but I mean, a podcast like this is an illustration of part of the evolution. This wouldn't have happened a few years back. You wouldn't have seen guys walking down the street with snugglies or, baby carriers or pushing strollers or being at home dads or going to library, reading times, and you can go on, and there wasn't discussion about family leave, it was maternity leave. And so it's changing pretty dramatically. Not fast enough for me, but pretty dramatically.
We're getting there.
Yeah, we are getting there. We are getting there. And, you know, you probably are aware all the attention that Representative Jimmy Gomez from California got when he appeared on the floor of the Congress carrying his baby.
Yeah.
Yeah, which was
Yeah.
very
It was all over TikTok.
it was happily all over a lot of places, and I think it's really, really important. And where I went with that, having talked about this daddying movement for a long time now, is, and I amuse myself, which often I do. I have to admit, um, is I wrote a blog right after that, and it asked the question: do you think George Washington wore his baby?
I probably bet that he didn't even know his kid's name.
Well,
Yeah.
well, it,
Or maybe like how many he had.
Yeah.
well, it turns out that George Washington did not have any biological children,
Huh.
No.
but Martha had 2 children when he married her. It
Hmm.
was
Okay.
second marriage, and I just learned that by trying to say, imagine what were the name of his kids, how many kids did he have, and so forth.
Right.
A little bit of an irony that he's the father of our country, uh, but he's not necessarily the daddy of our country. So I do a distinction
There
between
you go.
the
Yeah.
two things. So.
And going back to the dadvocacy consulting group, it honestly, there's so much more than just blogs here. I mean, there's film and book recommendations. Can anyone make those recommendations, or are these just things that you found that
No,
are good?
when we do that annual list and giveaway of some books, we invite people to make recommendations. So, absolutely. The film festival, which is my current obsession, um, is new.
Mm-hmm.
Thinking and the genesis of that was that after doing all of these interviews, um, actually about midway through the interviews, which followed, by the way, um, 2 years of doing focus groups with the consumers of daddying, also known as children.
Right.
Um, right. So, so I did 28 focus groups in 3 countries with kids ranging in age from 5 to 21. And I asked them questions like, and I think you'll both appreciate this in particular. So, one of the questions I would ask in those small groups of 5 to 7 kids of like ages is if you could create the perfect dad, what would he look like?
My dad.
So, the first focus group I did happened to be with 14-year-old boys. Some of the groups were, all boys, some all girls. We didn't talk in those days back in 1994, 95, 96. We didn't talk about binary and all of non-binary and all of that kind of stuff. It's a little easier to
Right.
get the groups together. And the second group I did, which was with 14-year-old boys, and I said, if you could create the perfect dad, what would he look like? And in true 14-year-old boy fashion, I got the eye roll, which you guys will get at some point. And it was like, Mister, there is no such thing as a perfect dad. And if there was, he'd be really boring. So I looked at him and I said, you know what? You're absolutely correct. There is no such a thing as a perfect dad, nor a perfect son, nor a perfect daughter, nor a perfect partner, nor a perfect teacher, nor a perfect anything. So I'm going to change the question. So I'm going to ask it this way. If you could create the most excellent dad you can imagine, what would he be like? And they agreed that that was a suitable, yeah,
I
change.
do like that question. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a better question. So it's kind of fascinating what came out of that, and how when I asked the dads what they thought the kids said in the individual interviews, that I said I did this with the kids, and they gave me a list of qualities. What do you think they said? The dads were able to guess exactly what the kids said because they believed it was the same qualities. Yeah.
So we pass our qualities and values down to our children. Is pretty much what happened there.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, it's not rocket science. It's
yeah.
pretty simple to figure out. I mean, I'll bet you guys can guess the one that came up first in every single group.
Uh, I just my mind goes straight to John Stamos, so the adjective is just cool. I don't know why my brain goes there.
What do you think, Tom? It's simple.
Yeah,
It's
it's
basic.
Mr. Rogers
So
would be.
it wasn't a person, it was a quality. And
Mhm.
and the quality is being there. It's really that basic and that fundamental. So it's
Yeah.
being, but then the same 14-year-old boy said, but I mean really being there. And I said, playing devil's advocate, what's the difference between being there and really being there? And he said, well, my dad comes home. Remember, this is 1994. My dad comes home. He sees me sitting on the couch doing my homework, and he sits down next to me and he starts reading the newspaper. And my dad thinks he's there. He's not. Now, of course, we could say, smartphones, television,
Hmm.
whatever, iPads. Um, So it's being there, but really being there emotionally, psychologically, as well as physically. The second was, and this is kind of interesting, I think, um, take us as seriously as we take ourselves.
Yeah.
Us as
That's
seriously as we take ourselves.
I
So,
don't think a lot of parents think about that because I mean they kind of look at their kids and these these things that they're doing, they're like, oh, this is just a silly game, or this is just a goofy hobby, and it's like, no, this is this child's life at the moment.
yeah.
So just
So your 4-year-old comes home from school and
yeah,
says, I got teased today, or I was bullied. And as a parent, one of the things you might want to say is, kid, wait till you get to be my age. You'll wish that problem you had. But to that child, it's a gigantic problem,
yeah,
and it's everything. So take your kid as seriously as he takes or she takes herself. The third out of the five most often cited one was, be a passionate advocate for us. The fourth is, show us you love us and be affectionate. And then the fifth was, provide us with security and protection. None of those are radical, and none of those would be a surprise. The one that really surprised me was, don't argue with mom in front of me.
yeah.
That was
Um,
important, in front of me. So there was no illusion, especially with the older kids, that it's possible to live in a close relationship without there being disagreement. Just don't have that disagreement in front of me.
Me and my wife, we have code words for things.
Could
Like
it be
when
pineapple?
did you? Okay, so you listened to that
Yeah,
episode.
he did listen to that one.
Yeah,
um,
I
and
did.
then so that's our code word when I say something out of line to her, or she says something out of line to me. Our new code word when one of us is, because we've got a toddler that's 3 going on 13. Um, it's very
Yep.
stressful, so we've started fruit salad is our word for when we are getting too frustrated with our daughter. So it's all fruit related for some reason. But yeah, those are definitely, they're not grand gestures really. They're just small things that we can do to be grand.
Yeah.
Um, and
So
you had mentioned, oh, I'm sorry.
I just wanted not to neglect to mention the film festival since I said
Yes.
my current obsession. But um, so in 2003, I saw an amazing movie that was a Academy Award nominee as Best Documentary. It didn't win, but it was one of the three finalists, and it is called My Architect the Sun's Journey, by Nathaniel Kahn, about his father, Louis Kahn, who was mainly absent from his life, and he decided that he wanted to find out about his father after his father had died, um, to find out more about his father. And he decided to do it by going to the people who had commissioned his architecture, his buildings that he had made all over the world, to learn about his father that way, to see the buildings, to talk to the people who had asked him to build it, commissioned him. And I found myself crying through at least half the movie, um, and wondering at the end why it nailed me as much as it had. And all, which was pretty easy for me to figure out, but also to wish that my dad, who had died about a year before that, to wish that he had been sitting next to me watching the movie, because then we could have talked about things that came up in the movie that also were art stuff, but it would have been hard to bring that up spontaneously, so we could have referenced the film. So that was the initial idea for doing a daddying film festival, was to show films that fathers and kids could watch together and then talk about issues that came up. That morphed since 2003 or 4 into what we started last year as a pilot, and this year it's full blown, which is the Daddying Film Festival and Forum. And how it's morphed is that last year we invited children to make videos of 1 to 5 minutes long on the theme "A Letter to My Father" or "Father Figure," um, and to send those in. And when I say kids, we're talking about 4 distinct age groups, but we did it via grade levels rather than age groups, which is elementary school, middle school, high school, and undergraduate college. Um, and we received films from 17 countries. It totally blew my mind. Um, and we trained kids of that same age to judge the films. And they judged 10 semifinalists in each of the 4 age groups. And we sent the 10 semifinalists to people in the film industry, actors, directors, producers, cinematographers, and so forth. They narrowed it down to 5 finalists. Each of the 5 finalists earned $250. Um, and then their films were put online for 6 days, and the public voted on the winner. And the winner received another $250, so that's 500, and an Atticus Award. You have any idea
Oh
what
wow.
that comes from?
Atticus Finch.
Yeah, Atticus
Yeah.
Finch, widely believed to be the best father figure portrayed in literature and the movies. Um,
Yeah, I can agree.
anyway, it was successful beyond what we thought it could be in terms of just the interest, which goes with your podcast in a way that there is interest, in the issues that you're talking about. So this year, because I love a challenge, we expanded it in a lot of different ways. We opened it up to fathers and father figures. So you guys can each submit a film. We've extended the deadline to May 1st, so not a lot of time. Um, but we've gotten more father films this year than kid films, which is interesting to me. Um, and the other ways we expanded it, it's not just a letter to my father or father figure. And the father figure part is very important. And Tom, you spoke to it at the beginning, where you talked about the lady who said you're like a father figure to her. So not everybody has the dad they most wish they had or needed. And so you create your own patchwork dad, as I call it. Um, anyway, so we've added not just a letter to my father or a father figure, but the most fun thing I ever did with my dad or wish I could do with my dad. And the third theme is if I could make a wish come true for my dad. And again, it's dad or father figure. And so the opposite for dad submitting the film, it's, the wish come true for my kid and so forth. And so we've added the fathers, we've extended the length of the film to 7 minutes, and we're doing two live forums, which will be in Albuquerque on the 24th of June and in Santa Fe on the 25th of June. And we will show the winning films, and we'll have a woman who is going to come and talk about her research about how men are portrayed in the media, and then we're going to show a full-length feature film at the end. So that's a festival, and it's very exciting. The hardest part of doing this work in terms of the festival is remembering when I have to attend to all of the details, remember why we're doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
that's a
and
big.
I'm actually, I think I'm gonna try and rush a video because I personally I love movies and TV shows. I think that one of the best quotes is that in the movies it answers all the questions in life that we have. And I probably butchered the quote, but I strongly believe that we can solve anything through the movies. We connect with them. We find different ways to solve our own problems and issues through different movies. Star Wars, uh, Casablanca, everything. And um, there, I've got ideas. I don't want to ruin anything, but I'm gonna try and put something together. So I'm really excited about that.
No, it would be really great. You mentioned Star Wars, and one of the talks I gave in front of a professional group, and I tend to bore myself many times when I'm doing such a thing. So I wanted to throw something in that would, take me off course a little bit. And so I told the gathered folks that we had a guest who was going to come in at the end of the talk because he really wanted to deliver a message to them. And of course, they're looking at me like, I'm a little bit crazy, which is appropriate. And so at the last minute or two before I duck down behind the podium and I pop up and I'm wearing a full Darth Vader mask.
Uh,
And I say, I am your daddy. And talk was the difference between father and daddy, I just had them leave the room with this question: how differently do you think the story would have ended if he had been daddy and not father?
I think I might have brought it up in an earlier episode, or it might have just been when we were talking before we started recording. Um, in one of the Guardians of the Galaxy films from Marvel, uh, Yondu is saving Peter Quill, like after he killed his father. He said he might have been your father, but he wasn't your daddy because he had raised him.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, it is a big decision. You can become a father by accident, but you can only become a daddy by intention.
Yeah. And as far as the film festival, for anybody that is interested in joining it, or just want to look at information, um, the Instagram page is Daddying Film Fest, all one word. And that's actually how I got connected to you, Alan, was through Instagram. But there you can find links to the Daddying Film Fest, and pretty much everything that you guys do, which is a quite extensive. You, I mean, honestly, I feel lazy compared to how much you
Yeah.
do. You're going everywhere and doing all these interviews and everything, and I'm struggling just to get out of bed.
Yeah, but I don't have little kids at home anymore,
Yeah, that's true.
That is true, and
and it's
you've been daddying a lot longer than both of us.
yeah,
So,
Yeah.
daddying and granddaddying. So
hmm
if I can say just one other thing about the way you begin your podcast with the awful dad jokes, which I guess is redundant, but um, when I was a school principal, it's actually two things. When I was the school principal, you got sent to my office for three reasons. One is the traditional reason that people get sent to the principal's office. That was the least important to me. Second reason was if you were caught being good. That was actually
I
the first reason. And then the third reason was if you told a really bad pun or riddle, you got sent to inflict it on me because, as the teachers would say, "Oh my God, that's worse than the ones he tells us at the faculty meeting." And of course,
I like those second two reasons a lot. Like
yeah,
the affirmation of like, "Hey, no, you were really good. Thank you for doing this. Also, thank you for this terrible joke that I now get to tell other people."
and then the teachers would say, "Alan, where do you come up with all these jokes all the time?" And I say, "Hello, you're saying the kids." But the more serious thing about the jokes is one of the programs that we do is called Armor Down, Daddy Up. And it's a program we do for veterans who are suffering with PTSD, who are dads. And so the program is the Armor Down portion of it is mainly mindfulness, yoga, meditation, exercise. And the Daddy Up portion of it is like what we've been talking about. And we do the program for fathers and their kids. And we created something called the Daddying Quotient, and we have a form that the kids fill out and the dads fill out about what are the qualities they'd most like to see in their dad. And I think we have 38 of them that they get to choose from, and they're pretty much in complete agreement except for one area, and that is that the kids say they want their dad to kid around and have a sense of humor. So I think if any of us think about what is somebody with PTSD who's recently, finished with his deployment, sense of humor and kidding around is probably not something that seems to come to the top of the list.
Yeah.
And so part of the way we handle that is that in each subsequent session that we do, we require the dads to come with a dad joke.
There you go. I like that.
And it's amazing what it does. It's just amazing. And we talk about it's fine to smile, it's fine to laugh, it's fine to kid around, Anyway, so that's
So especially like when you're on deployment, like you're trained to be serious most of the time because you could be seeing combat. Especially like when you are in combat situations instead of like, oh, I'm just stationed here at this base that doesn't see anything. And like having to come home and be able to kid around and pal around with your child can be difficult.
yeah, very difficult. So
Yeah. You can never underestimate the usefulness of a good dad joke. And if I can convince my wife of that, that'll be fantastic. But before we wrap up, Allan, is there anything else that you want to mention as far as the DCG or the film festival that we didn't touch on?
no, I think we covered it all. I mean, the sort of final thing I'd like all of us to believe is we really can become the dad we want to be. We just really need to think about it, and we don't usually spend much time thinking about it. So creating that North Star, if you would. It's one of the other things I do in some of the workshops I do is if I talk to guys of your vintage, I will say, gentlemen, did you know that there was a time before we had GPS? And we used to have.
Oh God!
Oh,
I remember having to like use a map or print out like MapQuest directions, and yep.
so we used to use the map, and there were times before there was a map, and we used to use a compass. And there was a time before compasses, and guess what? We used the stars, and we had a North Star. We had what is called a lode, LODE, lode star. So I always think it's really important for each of us as a dad to have our dad lode star. What is that one thing that guides us as we move forward as dads. So I think it's just conveying the notion that we really can be the parent we want to be. That's really, really important message. We do not, as I said earlier, there's not a dad gene. We get to create it. We get to determine. So that would be the final.
And that's about as dad as it gets.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
If you enjoy our content, please give us a 5-star rating and review on your favorite podcast platform. And if you want to keep up with the latest dad jokes and memes, find us on Instagram at asdadasitgetspod. If you want to reach out to us, you can find us at asdadasitgets@gmail.com.